Now I'm going to invite Wally's daughter-in-law Jenny to come. Jenny, would you like to come, please, and just share what you've prepared along with your family, please?
Wally was born Valter Liivamagi in the southern Estonian town of Antsla on the 3rd of March 1924. His mother Olga worked on a farm and his father had left before Valter was born, so he was raised by his grandmother Lisa in his earliest years. For young Valter, school was more than 5 kilometres from home. In summer he would walk through the countryside and in winter he would ski. With little income from his mother, Valter left school after grade 4 and began to work as a farmhand, learning skills that would benefit him through the rest of his life. Olga did not remain alone for long. Along with his stepfather, they moved to the border town of Volga in search of work. It was here that Valter gained work as an apprentice painter. Valter's mother had 3 daughters, Hilda, recently deceased, Asti, still living in Estonia, and Lisa, who died as an infant. Though Valter maintained contact with his surviving sisters all his life, he did not get along with his stepfather and rarely spoke of him. With the onset of World War II, Valter was conscripted to the Estonian army, and with the arrival of the Germans in Estonia, Valter's experience with machinery from his days on the farm saw him assigned to driving a range of heavy vehicles, taking German artillery to the front line. Of course, the war did not go well for Germany, and a retreat south out of Estonia became the only option for survival. The journey out of Estonia was full of danger with Russian troops all around, and those who began survived to reach Germany. The journey south took 2 weeks, and Valter recounts a moment that in that journey when an old Latvian woman called out, "You're a long way from home," and then he realised he may never return. In Germany, Valter was sent to work at the motor pool, maintaining vehicles and driving for the German army. Good fortune saved him from being sent to the Russian front, and when he went with an officer on leave to Poland. They were refused entry, but rather than return to camp, they spent the weekend partying, only to find out that when they returned, everyone else had been shipped out. With the end of the war, Valter gained employment as a driver for the American Army. Around this time, he met Kuno Seaman, and little would they have known it then, they would become lifelong friends. The story goes that after the war, Kuno would have been happy to stay in Germany and hadn't counted on Valter presenting him with immigration papers to Australia. Valter had replied to immigrate to Australia and decided it would be good for Kuno as well. Kuno accepted the documents and they boarded the train to Naples and then the ship that would bring them to the new life in Australia with many other displaced persons from Estonia and other European nations. Disembarking in Melbourne, they were first sent to camp at Bonegilla. Valter was then sent to Kopai in Central Eyre Peninsula, along with a small group of Estonians, which included his now good friend Kuno. It was in the nearby town of Lock that Wally, as he was now known, and Kuno met 2 waitresses working at the hotel and began dating. Wally dated Peggy, and on the 24th of July they were married and set up home in the married quarters at Tumby Bay. Marriage quarters were 2 tents face to face. Being married, Wally was released from his 2-year government contract and they moved to Port Lincoln. Wally went to work at Blacker and Beesing as a motor mechanic and they were provided with a small rental home on Dublin Street. Peggy often described their home as a motorcycle workshop where Wally had parts of old motorcycles laid out on all floors. It was here in 1951 their first child, Gail, was born. Their second child, Robert, was born in 1953 and Peter in 1956. Their neighbour Cyril was a builder and helped Wally and Peggy build their first home on a block of land they had purchased in Knott Street. Wally left Blacker Motors, as it was now called, in 1961 and started work as a fireman at the Port Lincoln Power Station. Over the next few years, with study gained a trade qualification as a first-class engine driver. Wally took to fishing at Coffin Bay with Cyril in 8-foot dinghies they built themselves and also enjoyed fishing off the cliffs and beaches around Fisheries and Sleaford Bay area. It had to be for the challenge. Only once did he come home with a big fish. From his days in Germany after the war, Wally had developed a love for photography, and in Port Lincoln he set up a dark room in which he would spend many hours. He had joined the photographic club, presenting many of his studies for viewing and appraisal. In 1967, when the Port Lincoln power station closed, the family moved away from Port Lincoln as Wally was transferred to Mount Gambier Power Station. While living in Mount Gambier, golf became a passion, and for several years he would head out to the golf club every weekend, regardless of the weather, to play a round. It was at golf that Wally received his one and only sporting trophy, a small plastic cup for winning a local tournament. In the last few years of his working life, Wally worked at Mount Gambier Hospital, Woods and Forest Department, and finally Nangwarry Timber Mill. Wally retired in 1989 on his 65th birthday, and the very next day he and Peggy moved to their home at Smithfield Plains, enjoying the backyard pool and being close to Peggy's younger sister Pat and her family. Living in Adelaide meant that Wally would become more involved in the activities of Estonia House, Esti Maya, and soon took over the role of librarian as well as joining the Pensioners Club and Veterans Club. When maintaining a house became too much, they downsized to a unit, still in the Elizabeth area. It was during this time Wally taught himself to use a computer and set about putting his memories of life in Estonia and experiences at war into writing. With much help from Valter, he produced his book, Ansla Mare Alban, a copy of which found its way to the library in the University of Tartu. After the passing of Peggy in year 2000, Wally sold the unit at Elizabeth and moved to Henley Beach. Wally did get back to Estonia, but was never tempted to resettle there. His family was in Australia, and that's where he always wanted to be. Pop is greatly loved by all of his grandchildren.